Yeah, Esha, we're just giving you the access. Just a few moments. It has now been enabled. You might just want to check, Esha. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Perfect. So I think we more. Just let's just wait for just a few more minutes and then we can start. Just. To all the attendees, just wanted to let you know that your mics and video would be disabled. So in case you have some questions, please feel free to put it on the chat. The camera and mic access is only given to the speakers.
Sreepriya, you are on mute.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I just realized. So I think the team from Madhya Pradesh Pollution Control Board, so the access to the mic would be given only to the member secretary when he joins the call. For the rest of it, it would be just the attendee access. I hope it's clear now. All right. So I think we are good to begin. Just one. So thank you so much to everyone for joining this session. Hello, and I'm Sreepriya Sridharan from Karo, Sambhav. Welcome to the final episode of our series, Demystifying EPR, a key enabler for circular economy. You know, when we started off this session last year in April, our intention was to create an awareness on India's current position, key challenges, and also to explore innovative solutions. And uh, okay, is there someone? Hello? Yes. Is someone saying something? Okay. All right. So I'll go on. And before I begin, I would like to extend my gratitude to all our knowledge partners who have been there along this journey, WEEE Forum, GIZ, Switch Asia, as well as our principal partners and principal sponsors, Apple, HPE, and Dell Technologies, and to all the audience members who have been joining us since day one. Thank you for your continued support so far. So, from episode 1 to episode 7, we have discussed and touched upon a vast spectrum of topics within the circular economy industry, right from the need for digitalization and capacity building of stakeholders. We have deliberated upon the proposed EPR regulations. We have even we tried to understand the true cost of EPR as well as the elements that influence consumer behavior. We have touched upon what is material balance reporting and why is it the need of the hour. as well as I think the the last episode, we also discussed on how do we connect communities to strengthen waste collection systems in rural as well as semi-urban areas. Now, the discussions that have unfolded in the previous episodes is a living proof of that this enabling a circular economy or even achieving circularity is not the responsibility of just one individual, an organization, or say just the responsibility of an environment ministry. It is a collective responsibility. And that's why, as we wrap up the season 1 of Karo Sambhav's webinar series, we bring to you an interesting lineup of speakers, experts who are passionate about achieving this ambitious goal of circular economy with the help of collaborative partnerships and alliances. So on that note, I would like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Pascal Leroy, Director General, WEEE Forum. Over to you, Pascal.
Thank you very much, Sreepriya, and thank you for having the WEEE Forum as a knowledge partner. I have shared my presentation. Can you see it? Thank you very much.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So what I will do in, actually, I wanted to say also that the WEEE Forum is knowledge partner of these series of episodes, and we are grateful to be that knowledge partner because I think that I consider Karo Samba to be one of the North Stars as regards e-waste management. And today's presentation, I will share you some good practices as regards e-waste management. And you correctly said, Sripriya, that the challenges of today cannot be solved by one or two actors in the market. What we need is a collaborative approach, collaborative partnership. It's a collective responsibility. And I just wanted to share my thoughts on this in today's presentation. So it's just a few slides, but I hope you will find it meaningful. So the importance of the all actors principle. It's in the past few years, we have been working on that principle. It was actually the conclusion of many years of discussions. And because our mission, our DNA as an organization is to take on the worldwide societal challenge of electronic waste. So through alliances, partnerships, through projects, initiatives, for example, International E-Waste Day, we try to contribute to a solution of the e-waste challenge, which is worldwide and which is also societal. And this is, we have members across the world, actually with operation on all the 5 continents. Karo Samba is the only one from Asia so far. And as I said, I consider Karo Samba one of the North Stars when it comes to e-waste management. For the tonnage of collected e-waste since we started as WEEE Forum is 35 million tons, and every year it's around 3.1 million tons that we collect. That's equivalent to 310 Eiffel Towers. And one of the tools in our toolbox to take on the challenge of e-waste is grant-funded projects, and this is just a selection of projects that are funded by the European Union, and most of them center around collection, circularity, the improvement of the knowledge base, recycling. So that's exactly what I was saying when I said that we take on the challenge of e-waste, and projects is one of the tools in our toolbox. So without further ado, I wanted to say a few words about why we think that the extended producer responsibility principle needs to be redesigned. Of course, I could talk for a full day on this topic, but I'm trying to condense it in a few thoughts. And the central principle of that thinking is to say that the all actors principle means that all entities that have access to electrical and electronic waste are subject to minimum legal obligations and collaborate towards responsible operations. So there are these two aspects. Everyone who has access to e-waste has to have legal obligations, and everyone should be sitting around the table. And we call this the coordination body. And let me now give you a few examples of each partner, let's say, of each actor in the value chain with whom we should have partnerships. So it concerns local authorities, brokers, scrap dealers, reuse organizations, repair outfits, enforcement authorities, and EPAs, producers, retailers, end users, recyclers, and PROs. And of course, the WEEE Forum speaks for 50 producer responsibility organizations. They are not-for-profit organizations or entities that are controlled and mandated and run by manufacturers and importers of EEE. And so I'm going to give you 8 examples or good practices of this all actors principle. The first example is Ireland, that is very proud of having implemented the visible fee. They have, I think, 20 years experience of a very well-functioning visible fee that allows to cover all the costs arising from e-waste management. I think it's really one of the good practices in that field. And in Ireland also they have this approach of sitting together with the authorities, also with retailers and producers and producer responsibility organizations, and also the recyclers. And this visible fee is actually supported by the actors in the market. Netherlands is a second example for a good practice, and I single out WEEE flows as an example. WEEE flows is actually the practice of understanding the quantity and the identity of the e-waste that flows in your market. We call this the WEEE flows. And it means that you know exactly, or not exactly, but you have good estimates of the WEEE that is shipped out of the country illegally. For example, the share of WEEE that is irresponsibly handled. Of course, how much is formally collected. In Europe, it's 55%, by the way. In the rest of the world, on average, it's only 17%. That's one of the good impacts, good implications of the EPR legislation in Europe. After 20 years, I think we can say that we know much better what's going on in the market than 20 years ago. And that's thanks to the EPR principle of requiring certain standards also to be reached. And so Netherlands started, I think, 10, 15 years ago with a practice of, let's say, quantifying the WEEE flows. And in the meantime, many countries are adopting this research. They do similar research so as to understand what's going on in your market. That's very important also for the authorities to know what they should single out as priority. And also in the WEEE Forum, we have done European studies of WEEE flows. So basically we have European data. They are all sitting on our website. And we do this in collaboration with UNITAR, United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Let's go to the third example. Italy takes a lot of pride in having a Centro di Coordinamento, which is the Italian version of a coordination body. And it's actually an entity where many of the people you see here on the slide are sitting around the table, and they discuss things like whether or not everyone is taking his responsibilities, everyone is compliant, is in conformity with the rules and regulations. And my Italian colleagues always tell me that this is actually a good practice to copy. A fourth example is Norway with respect to enforcement. Recently, they did a research. It's also downloadable from their website, from Nursirk, one of the PROs in the WEEE Forum, whereby they wanted to know what exactly is going on with regards to illegal shipments of e-waste. And so they recruited so an inspector, let's say, and a detective to find out where the lines of shipments, where do the e-waste go to, which countries, which are the actors involved in that illegal trade. And so they mapped all this. So that person, I think he spent 1.5 years just trying to find out who are the crooks, the criminals, who are the people who engage in irresponsible behavior. And I think that's also a good practice. Enforcement is you can have the best law, but if you don't enforce that law, you're not making good progress. A fifth example is Belgium with WEEE. That's the name of an entity into which everyone who collects, who has access to e-waste should report. For example, shops that sell electronics and take back out of use electronics need to report this to WEEE. Manufacturers have, of course, as well, whatever the quantities they put on the market, they need to report to WEEE. If you're an entity such as Recupel, one of my members that also collects the e-waste, they have to report this to WEEE. And so everyone who has access to e-waste has to report the quantities and what's going on in this market. And that's a very, I was in touch with the chief executive of Recupel, and he said that is really a shining example of how reporting and registration has to be conducted. Sreepriya asked me then also to give an example of, let's say, a poor country that is being successful in e-waste management. And I think Moldova could be such a country. It's the country in red squeezed between Romania and Ukraine. And I recently visited Moldova, and one of the things that they do is, for example, they have a campaign mascot. And you would say, well, what's the importance of a mascot? The thing is that it focuses the mind, and people associate that mascot with the fact that they have to return their electricals. So every campaign is centered on that particular mascot. It's called Azalea. And it's very important also for children because it engages with children. It's actually a doll, and children are totally are very happy with this approach. And therefore, I think that's a good example. Other countries have a different approach. For example, the Norwegians 20 years ago, I remember they had a crow as a mascot. And so every country has this has his own practices. In Germany, they have very good law as regards online free riding legislation. So legislation countering online free riding. And it's a topic that is not often discussed, but it's very important. It's an issue of growing concern because more and more companies are actually selling products on the market, but they fail to register their activities, and they fail to report the quantities they put on the market. And so Germany has good legislation countering such irresponsible and illegal behavior. We call it online free riding. And the last example is Colombia, where the PROs and the actors in the market actually collaborate to have joint collective consumer campaigns. I think it's important that the consumer is not faced with multiple campaigns and identity of campaign and so on. It's important, I think, that the producer responsibility organizations, when they do consumer awareness raising campaign, that they do this jointly and using uniform symbols and models. So this is in a nutshell what I wanted to share with you, Sreepriya, and your event. I just wanted to say that EPR legislation in Europe is 20 years old. We started 20 years ago in 2002 with the first WEEE directive, WEEE legislation. And in the meantime, I think we can say that EPR has fostered the treatment standards, has fostered the level of quality with which we deal with end-of-life equipment. And also we collect a lot more than the rest of the world. I already told you that. And also the reporting is much more efficient than the rest of the world. However, the EPR principle has to be redesigned, as you correctly said, in light of the circular economy discussions. And that's one element. Another element is, for example, that the WEEE legislation has no consideration for critical raw materials. Everything is weight-based. So it's better in that respect to collect only washing machines than actually equipment that contain critical raw materials such as lithium and neodymium and the rare earth elements and gold and so on. And this is a blind spot in the current legislation. It's one of the reasons why we need to redesign the legislation. And then, and actually the main reason why we started this campaign calling for a redesign of the EPR principle is that the collection targets cannot be reached. That's the conclusion of a major study we did with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. The collection targets as they are currently designed in the legislation are not reachable. And that's an important consideration. And where 20 years ago legislation singled out the producer as the main or as the only person responsible, entity responsible, we are now arguing that we should consider the role that each actor that has access to e-waste has to have legal obligations and has to have a role to play in collaboration, partnership with the other actors on the markets. Thank you very much for your attention. If you need more, if you want to reach out to me, please do so, or any person in my team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascal, for ending it before time and sharing so much of valuable insights. I have one question. You mentioned that the collection targets cannot be reached. So just trying to figure out what are some of the low-hanging fruits to approach in that direction, where what are some regulatory changes that might be needed to, achieve that faster?
So we need an approach which is more conducive to circularity, because basically what we are saying is that in Europe, you have to reach 65% of the quantity of products that were placed on the market in the 3 preceding years. So if you have products with a lifetime of 20-25 years, for example, windmills and so on, you cannot reach that target because they were placed on the market in the past 20 years and they are not coming back yet. And so a country like Poland is that's an example of a bad practice. You have asked me for good practice, but that's an example of a bad practice because they are making, and actually Romania as well, they are making producers liable for a target which is beyond their control. And so that's one aspect. The other aspect is that actually it's an incentive for people to return to discard the end-of-life appliances. So it's a perverse incentive. If you have to reach a high collection target, it means that you have to discard a lot. Otherwise, you can't reach that collection target. So it's totally perverse. What we want, of course, is to have appliances that continue circulating in the economy, that people donate it, that people reuse it, that they repair it, that they repurpose it. That's actually the idea of a circular economy. And with the current targets in the EPR legislation, that's not conducive to such behavior. And I think that's one of the important lessons learned from 20 years EPR in Europe. And I hope that Indian legislation is not making the same mistake.
Hopefully so. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I would request you to stay back because I'm sure a lot of our audience members would have questions for you, which we can take it up towards the end of the session. And with that, now we will move on to the panel discussion. And I would like to introduce my colleague, Mr. Sushant. He is a material recovery facility expert and is also a consultant into various environment projects, a versatile person. So, Sushant, over to you to take up the panel discussion.
Thank you, Sreepriya. Can I be heard? Yes, thank you. So what a fantastic start and a nice place to take over from. I think the last point that Pascal made about the targets being completely recycling centric rather than, focusing on refurbishment, repairing, etc., reusing, such a valid point. Anyway, so thank you very much, Sreepriya and Pascal, and a very warm welcome to all the other, we have 53 participants in total. Like I said, great start to this final webinar titled A Shared Vision, Collaborative Partnerships Enabling a Circular Economy. I have the pleasure and privilege of moderating the next discussion, for which we have 4 esteemed panelists. Sreepriya, have our guest from Madhya Pradesh Pollution Control Board joined in? Great. Okay.
So he might join in a little late, but you may begin the panel. Yeah.
Okay, so we have 3 esteemed panelists for now and the 4th one to join in soon. here to share their perspectives on circular economy as well as experiences from the diverse work that they have undertaken over the past few years. To share his experience on government initiatives in this regard and the role of policy and cross-sectoral collaboration in circular economy, we have Dr. Kalyan Bhaskar, Associate Professor, Sustainability and Public Policy at XLRI, Jamshedpur. So look forward to hearing your views on this topic. And thank you for being with us today. To help us understand what goes into creating successful alliances and partnerships, as well as subsequently projects on circular economy and circularity, we have with us Esha Sar, Chief Advisor, South Asia, Alliance to End Plastic Waste, or as we commonly call it, AEPW. Esha, thank you for taking the time to share your valuable thoughts and feedback with us during the webinar. We also have with us Manjri Gopalan, in charge of product compliance, India and Sub-Asia Regional Manager from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, HPE. Welcome, Manjri. She will shed light on the importance of product design, improved product design, which is often ignored when we talk about circular economy, as well as the challenges and hopefully even some innovative measures that you have taken up at HPE to better meet your EPR compliances. And we also have with us Sreepriya. Should we wait to introduce Member Secretary? I think when he comes, you can just give me a heads up.
Yes, I think, yeah, I'll give you a heads up when he joins in. Yeah.
Great.
He's actually, just to inform others, Member Secretary has been called for a meeting by one of his seniors. So that's why he couldn't join immediately. But yeah, we can proceed.
Okay, super. Okay, so let's get right to it. My first question, Dr. Kalyan, you have been part of various committees I've seen on as part of Niti Aayog, as well as METI. Share with us your experiences on the work done there. What can we expect from the government in the years to come? As well as tell us about the importance of policy and regulation in meeting circularity objectives. You're muted, Dr. Kalyan.
Okay, now am I audible,
Yes.
Sushant?
Clear.
Yeah. Thank you, Sushant and Sreepriya and Karo Sambhav for this workshop, and thank you, Pascal, for setting the context. I also have a brief presentation on this. So should I make a presentation? The first question that I mentioned, the role of policies, perhaps in this, because I thought I'll narrate a story to give a response to you. So talk about some other context and then maybe come to perhaps the Indian context. So can I share perhaps the screen?
Sure.
Yeah, most certainly.
Okay. Yes. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Role of policies, because I'm speaking from Jamshedpur, connecting from Jamshedpur, I cannot help but talk about an incident that happened yesterday. The Union Minister for Road Transport and Highway was in Jamshedpur yesterday to inaugurate a number of road projects. And one of the projects they inaugurated was made using scrap steel waste from the Tata Steel plant here. We're talking about circular economy, the role of policies. So steel waste that was being dumped in a site just about 5 years back. Tata Steel had been dumping it. Now, since last 5 to 7 years, it has started reusing it, closing the loop, not necessarily in its own form, but now for road construction. So much so that the minister yesterday asked in Jamshedpur Tata Steel folks that can you give us more of the steel scrap and we will construct more highways through that. So I thought because we are having this webinar a day after that, so I thought this will be a good starting point to talk about that. But now coming, so I'll answer a question on the role of policy perhaps in this by taking you to Africa. This is a map of some countries in Africa. The center you see Democratic Republic of Congo, and if you see around DRC, you have Central African Republic, Republic of the Congo, Angola, Zambia, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, and South Sudan. Now you might wonder, what are these countries got to do anything with circularity or policies or everything? Now, so just give me time. So DRC, what we today know as DRC, was earlier known as Zaire. At least when I was a school student, I remember reading about Zaire. And the key exports from DRC are diamonds, gold, copper, cobalt. Now, this is that region which is very rich in minerals, minerals that are also known as, last 15 years have come to known as conflict minerals. Why conflict minerals? Because these are minerals that come from these areas. I think my screen has frozen. Am I still audible, Sushant?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Yeah. So these are conflict minerals, and about so when did the world come to know about conflict minerals? Less than 15 years back. And then there was a movie, Blood Diamond, which had come about 15-16 years back, which pointed out the number of issues in the supply chain of diamond being mined from DRC. And that was triggered by some role of NGOs, NPOs, and media in highlighting those issues. Later on, the politicians leapt up that issue. And the first regulations for that was in US, when we saw the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reforms and Consumer Protection Act, which specially mentioned that all companies, electronic companies, especially in the US, including Intel and HP and others, that use 4 conflict minerals, tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold, which are essentially coming from DRC. They have to disclose that, starting 3 years from the act. So there was no regulations for banning it, but now companies like Intel and HP, which were never bothering where is the material coming from, and it's a long and diverse and very invisible supply chain, now they have to trace it back to the mines. Is it coming from DRC? Is it fueling conflicts? 2 years back, EU also came out with a similar act. So again, policies, which behind those policies were a large mass movement by NGOs, some NPOs, and some media. Then the politicians coming together, regulators stepping together, government forming regulations, and that triggering a change of initial activities in this. Now, what we are seeing in conflict minerals, later on when I come, I'll talk about the critical minerals, perhaps to discuss the discussion we are having in India today about critical minerals. It is important to know how a similar trajectory has happened in the past. Now, what happened in this case was, now Intel, for example, in a company, so I teach a case on Intel and how policies forced Intel to look into conflict minerals, the role played by media, especially again talking about circularity now, but then conflict minerals and the human right abuses. And then the regulators and government stepping in. And then Intel, the common response or the traditional way of thinking was, oh, it's so difficult to do in electronics chain. How can we do it? It's so widespread. We cannot do it because there are mines, trading house, distributors, then there's smelters, suppliers, and all of that. Industry groups also oppose that. But essentially, these were the same stakeholders with which Intel participated, with which Intel collaborated, and then went on to establish within 4 years of the law being enforced a way to trace back the conflict minerals back to the mines, and then to bring about responsible practices in the whole value system, something which was considered almost impossible to do when these issues were being discussed. And the lessons we learned from the Intel experience was that whenever you have long and invisible supply chain in the electronic sector or in the e-waste sector today, perhaps, it is very difficult to begin with. And you need to work with multiple partners. And that working requires a building trust. Without building trust, which is a time-consuming process, no progress can be made. This is not a company-specific problem. This is an industry-specific problem. This is a society-specific problem. So the traditional mindset of working as a silo approach, individual approach, will not work to solve these largest societal problems. There is a need to bring transparency in the value chains, and there is a need to gain legitimacy. Legitimacy from your partners, legitimacy from other stakeholders. And that requires maybe having some audits, third-party assurance mechanisms to do that. And this is just one example of how cross-sector partnerships work. I'll touch more upon cross-sector partnerships later. For the moment, I'll restrict it to this. But to sum up, essentially what I want to say, policies are very critical in this case to bring about a legitimacy, to give that initial push and nudge. Had that policy not come out in the US about conflict minerals, we wouldn't have had Intel and HP and Dell to talk about conflict minerals today. So they aren't going to firms aren't necessarily going to act on their own, out of their own free will. There has to be that nudge, there has to be that pressure. It can come from the top, from the management, it can come from consumers, it can come from NGOs, NPOs creating enough pressure, it can come from regulators. And then that starts a change of activities which results in a change. And we can't expect an overnight change in 2 or 3 years. So India, some of us in India can get frustrated, but it's been 11 years, 12 years since the rules were regulated, implemented, and not much progress has been made. Depending on the parameters on which you evaluate progress, a lot has been done. Not to say to be content that, yeah, this is enough, but more needs to be done, but we have to have a longer time span because this is not a company specific. This is not Manjari's problem or HP's problem that they're trying to solve. This is a industry, society specific problem, and therefore we need to give time to this. So I think I'll restrict it there, and then maybe jump in later.
Yes, thank you. I think very valid point. I think policy also, and I think Pascal talked about implementation. So having the right policy in place and implementation, I think, are the two things which are currently holding us back in a sense. Next question to Esha. Esha, how does an organization like APW come into being? Like, what is the guiding principle that will bring together your partner brands as part of this alliance? And also tell us about the work that APW is currently doing in this regard.
Thanks, Sushant, and thanks to the Karo team for organizing this. I think very pertinent dialogue when we talk about circular economy. So the Alliance is a very young organization, essentially came into being in 2019 when large companies who work in the plastics value chain decided that, there was a lot of work happening on the ideation side. So in terms of targets, commitments, and so on and so forth. So a lot of good work happening there on the thought leadership piece. But there wasn't really a global organization which would act as a do tank, so to speak. And that's how the Alliance was created. So essentially, the whole mandate was how do we channel expertise, funding, how do we de-risk solutions which would help address the issue of plastic waste leakage into the environment at scale in countries to begin with where the leakage is high, but also in other countries where, which are slightly higher up the waste hierarchy, but still, I mean, nobody's sort of cracked it completely. So that was the sort of genesis of the Alliance, why the organization came into being. And I think the biggest strength of the Alliance today is really the cross value chain approach. So we have the large resin producers, we have the brands who are essentially the consumers of or the users of the packaging, we have the converters who make the packaging, and we have the waste management companies. And led alongside that, we work with a whole network of partners. In fact, Karo Sambhav is one of the partners that we work with here in India. And the knowledge or the collective intelligence that we bring across the table is immense, right? Because brands have certain issues which cannot be solved in isolation unless you work with the people who design the packaging. The people who design the packaging cannot solve that issue in isolation until they get, for example, circular polymers from the resin producers. The waste management players cannot work to design waste management ecosystems unless they are aware of what is going to change in 5 years' time. You can't have assets that you create with millions of dollars of investment for all of a sudden to render that entire stream going out of the ecosystem, right? So the concerted effort by bringing all these value chain actors together in the implementation side of things is quite critical. So with the Alliance, what we have been doing in the last 3 odd years that we have existed now, of which 2 were within the pandemic, was we have now a portfolio of 50 plus projects across the world. We have a network of 70 plus member companies from across the plastics value chain. And we are working with governments, we are working with not-for-profits, we are working with the for-profit waste management sector to really build solutions. So if you look at what we do, we have projects where we are de-risking. We are basically trying to prove solution models, which then gives commercial investors, which gives the development banks such as the IFCs and the ADBs confidence that this is an investable project. And this is something which has a solid business case behind it. Because one of the things we have realized very quickly is there is a place for CSR activities in this space. There is a space for grants in this space, but every project, unless it has a really strong business model behind it, the moment the grant maker or the funder or the donor exits with funding, these projects don't stand on their own 2 feet. And you have so many cases of projects which fall flat after the donor exits because never had a business case to begin with. And where this cross value chain approach helps is we can bring together the different actors in terms of offtake. We can bring together the technology providers to give technology inputs into how to design the system. We can actually create the market pull, because where is that circular polymer going to go at the end of the day? It will go to the brands who have these commitments that they have made to have X% of recyclable packaging or X% of packaging which is made from recycled content and so on and so forth. So I'll stop there. We still have a long way to go. We are learning as we grow, and very interested to learn from the electronic waste industry side of things as to how they are tackling some of the challenges that are common actually to the whole waste management space.
Thank you, Esha. I think that's a problem that we are facing, at least with MRFs, is that there's CSR funding, but like you say, there is no business case there. And then, once the CSR funding is done, you just have to wrap up, and then the next person comes over. It's really not the most sustainable model. But this cross value chain approach, I think, would really be a great solution to this issue. Thank you, Esha. Over to Manjri. Manjri, what does circular economy mean to you? And you work with product compliance. Tell us about some initiatives that you may have taken at HP to improve your product design, to improve recyclability and things of that sort.
Thank you, Shushan. And pardon me if I'm under weather, so I might stop in between. I have cough and cold, so pardon me for my poor audio.
Sure.
First of all, thank you, Karo Sambhav team, for organizing this and inviting me to talk and share my views on circular economy. If you ask what is circular economy, in my personal view, it's it's something which seeks to replace your linear production processes of take, make, and dispose with cycles, whereby we are reducing the resource extraction and waste generation while increasing the reusability of material. And it's not a new concept, by the way. It has been discussed for the last over 40 odd years. It has just started gaining traction among businesses and consumers in the last few years. Maybe because of the reason, like Kalyan said, maybe because of the regulatory pressures over there, or maybe even businesses have started seeing value in it. I would say it's not one factor that drives into circular economy. Both plays an important role. Businesses see there's a value in it. There's a customer need in circular economy, as well as there's a policy makers who are putting pressures, which is driving circular economy. That being said, personally, I feel circular economy should not be limited to just recycling or reuse. It gives you an opportunity to rethink at your product entirely, completely rethink at the product. Often, products are made with just linear thinking, only one lifespan in mind. seldom products are designed with consideration for repairability, recyclability, disassembly, remanufacture, or limiting waste streams. However, if you consider all these elements, starting from product design, you're not only actually extending the life of the product and limiting the waste, but also converting the inefficient linear production processes into an effective closed loop system. At HP, extending the life of the product is not a mere afterthought. We design our products for disassembly and recyclability from the start to ensure the products and the materials can be reused. We have integrated the circular economy principles throughout our product lifecycle. So be it material selection, the design phase, during the use phase by the customers, or end of the life disposal of the product, or ensuring the materials which are recycled and recovered, they are used back in the product. We have adopted a holistic approach in integrating circular economy in our company's DNA now. HP lifecycle design approach helps to minimize the consumption and waste generation while maximizing the material that can be recovered and fed back into the system. So this is more than just recycling or reusing. We are actively working on design for environment, design for energy efficiency, design for material innovation, design for longevity and recyclability. Now, that being said, how we are considering design for environmental circular economy, I want to shift the conversation a bit towards another important phase of the product, that is the use phase. We understand the major environmental impact of the product results during the use of our products by our customers. So to address, and that arises mostly because of the power required to boot up these systems, like servers and storage. If we talk about the power required to boot up the system and set up a data center is immense. To address this concern, we have developed an innovative business model called HP GreenLake. Excuse me. So HP GreenLake, what it does is it helps the customer to attain their ESG goals and sustainability goals. What is GreenLake's business model is nothing else but it helps the customer to own the, they don't have to own the hardware or software for their data needs. They enjoy all the benefits of the data center as a service and pay only for what they use. Now, you may ask me, how is this adding up to the sustainability story? Where is this business model adding up to the sustainability story? So let me give you an example. Normally, what happens is a customer, if he has a forecast of or projection of, let's say, 4 servers or 5 years, they buy the entire requirement in one go in the year one itself, in order to avoid the laborious and the cumbersome procurement process. Have to go through this procurement process, budget approvals have to be done, RFPs have to be floated, supplier onboarding, and then deployment of the products and setting up the data center is a laborious process. In order to avoid that, what the customer does is they buy and over provision the data, the servers in one go, and they start using it in the beginning of the first year itself. However, basically, if you look at the current need of the customer for his data, would be just 1 server or 2 servers. But because of the over provisioning, he start using and putting a lot of energy, not only in running these servers, but also the energy that would be spent in maintaining the data centers, AHUs, air handling units, and maintaining it at a cooling temperature. So this is where the GreenLake services come into the picture. So when a customer partners with HPE, we monitor the customer's data consumption pattern and let the customer know when an additional rack is needed for them to go beyond the data consumption. And since the customer already has a contract with HPE, whenever he gets to know that, okay, I have reached a threshold and I need to go beyond, he doesn't have to make a procurement. He doesn't have to go through the procurement cycle. We deploy the servers with a real-time basis, and customers start enjoying it, the data seamlessly. And what happens is during that, when the addition of servers happen only, so that happens 3 years or 2 years down the line. So initially for 1.5 years, 2 years, or whatever the time period would be, the customer saves a lot of energy in terms of direct energy used by the product, as well as by the energy saving that happens in the data center. This is just one aspect of the energy usage of our how contributing to the energy savings there. Let me bring another aspect of this innovative model, everything as a service that we have launched. In this case, what happens is the ownership or chain of custody of the IT assets remains with HPE. We maintain the oversight of the asset management and disposition. So at the end of the contract, what we do is we give a flexibility to the customer either to use or take the ownership back. They retain the ownership of the equipment, or else if the customer doesn't want to own it, we look into the product and see, can it be reused, renewed, or it has to be recycled, depending upon the contract terms. So obviously, as we all know, reusing and renewing is better than recyclability when it comes to circular economy. That's how it also adds up to the sustainability story. So what I'm trying to say, if I summarize what I'm trying to put here, is circular economy is not just about recycling, as I already said. It gives us an opportunity to redefine the way we do businesses today. It's time to go beyond the traditional mindset of sustainable product design, which I'm sure a lot of brands have now started doing because it has become a business hygiene. We need to start exploring other areas which has huge environmental impact and start developing innovative ideas to reduce environmental impact in these areas. And HPE Green Lake is one of us initiative in this stuff. I'll give it back to you now.
Thank you very much, Manjari. That's very interesting. You said it's the Green Link. Is that am I using the right word? Lake, L-A-K-E. Okay, that's a very interesting initiative, not just in terms of energy conservation, but also I think if, like I say, in terms of reusability, or in case the product cannot be reused, then in terms of even collection and meeting your EPR compliances aside also. So that's a very interesting initiative there. Very interesting. Yes. Back to Dr. Kalyan. You mentioned in your opening remarks about the importance of partnerships. We heard from Esha also how these partnerships should be, at the end of the day, sustainable. They should be, in terms of in financially, operations, even otherwise. Tell us more about your work in partnerships, and also maybe if you could touch upon, I don't know if it's the right time and context, upon CRMs, or maybe we'll come to that a little later. We'll stick to partnerships and collaborations. The importance, and if there are so many good models available, what are the challenges and how do you see those challenges overcome to better meet circularity objectives? You're muted, Professor Kalyan.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. Just give me a moment. Yeah, so to answer your question on the role of partnerships, I think this is where I just discussed about the Intel case, and I think if I again reflect on what Esha mentioned as far as plastics is concerned, what Manjari mentioned as far as HP is concerned. So any organization if you have to incorporate or integrate circular economy or do anything on e-waste or plastic waste management, there is only a little you can do on your own. You have to partner with others. Those partners can be your traditional suppliers, can be your traditional distributors, can be your traditional consumers, the ones the organizations are most accustomed to dealing with, or can have to be organizations that you typically don't associate with. For example, NGOs and NPOs, partnering with Greenpeace or Toxics Links or perhaps Center for Science and Environment in the Indian context, or maybe partnering with the regulators like Nestle did with FSSAI post Maggie crisis, or perhaps partnering with your competitors. And that is something which traditional management literature also does not talk more about that. So the industry partnership, HP, she was mentioning Manjari about. So how does Pepsi and Coke tie up? How do they tie up? How do they collaborate? When all their lives, they have been fiercely competitors of each other. How do they cooperate without anyone feeling that someone can free ride? Someone can essentially free ride, do nothing and gain the maximum benefit out of that. And that's been a challenge as far as partnerships are concerned. But most of these partnerships are what you would call the same sector partnership. If, for example, HP collaborates with Dell or Apple, these are again formal sector producer companies, formal registered entities, maybe in one country or the other country, partnering with each other. But how does, for example, HP tie up with a kabadi wala, perhaps in Delhi? So that is what an example of cross-sector partnership. A formal sector company collaborating with a informal kabadi wala, or for example, formal sector company partnering even with a government. Even that is a cross-sector partnership. Or a regulator, that regulator and producers partnering, even that is a cross-sector partnership. Government and regulators, CPCP partnering with the informal sector is again an example of cross-sector partnerships. And on cross-sector partnerships, the literature is rather scarce. So the work that I am doing on both on the ground side as well as on the literature side also. So what we find that there is relatively less literature on cross-sector partnership, especially when it comes to talking about solving these problems of waste management. That partnership gets even scarce. So the traditional models that companies will use, okay, in case of such thing, apply this framework, apply this approach, and then solve the problem. There aren't any ready-made frameworks available for solving problems like e-waste in a country like India with large informal sector. Now, that type of context isn't available there. The traditional European models also, rather European, the traditional Western models, then don't help us solve problems in countries like India, where the informal sector has a very high presence, where the consumers don't see themselves as generators of waste. Because we don't see that we are generating waste and okay, you come up and we'll pay you money for that. Instead, the approach is, okay, we are generating of some value, which you can deal with, but we want money for that. So how does a PRO like Karo Sambhav, if a Karo Sambhav was operating in Europe, its model would have been very different because it would expect people to pay for its services. And instead, Karo Sambhav has to pay people to get material from them and then still be a viable enterprise. Karo Sambhav is not an NGO or an NPO with a mandate to improve India. That's not the mandate of Karo Sambhav. How does it make money while working in this? So and the role Karo Sambhav PROs have when the regulators, the rules change in the producers and the informal sector. So based on the work that I have done and the literature that we have found, so essentially 3-4 quick points. Most of these problems of waste management, whether plastic waste or the steel waste I talked about, Tata Steel, or perhaps the automobile waste or e-waste, these have the traits of what in public policy we refer to as wicked problems. Problems that are very difficult to define, very difficult to break it down into simple cause and effect problems, problems that cannot be easily solved, problems that have multiple issues together. And this has been one of the classic approaches in wicked public policy for years. And most of these problems of waste management, circular economy have those traits. And therefore, these are difficult to solve, difficult to define. How do you define plastic? Is plastic the problem, or people way of managing the plastic waste is the problem, or the lack of waste dustbins by municipalities is that the problem? And for such wicked problems, literature is abound that that cross-sector partnerships are very essential. That municipalities need to collaborate with the informal sector, waste aggregator, waste picker, rag pickers. If a company is interested and serious in doing that activity beyond the compliance route, it has to partner with them. So cross-sector partnerships become very critical in solving problems like e-waste, plastic waste. This requires often collaborating with non-competitors, and that collaboration which is in a non-competitive manner. So how do we see this as a problem affecting the whole industry, whole society? And if an individual company, HP were to do it or Coke were to do it, the cost would be X. And that cost would be prohibitively very much for them to simply say, okay, dismiss this idea. But if you collaborate with others, that X can come down to maybe X by 3 or by X by 2. But that requires trust. And often fierce competitors don't have good trust. In automobile companies, we have some alliances in India, for example, of Suzuki and Toyota alliance, or for example, Hyundai and Kia alliance. So those alliances are there, but for those alliances to work in the same sector or across sectors, you need to have some level of trust, some level of camaraderie between the organizations. We have seen in case of Karo Sambhav itself, or the others who have tried to work with the informal sector. It's not easy to initiate a conversation with the informal sector, and more difficult to foster and continue that relationship. So how do you build that trust? How do you retain that trust? And for that trust, you need to have transparency. Now, if you talk to the key stakeholders when we have had our research and talked to all the key stakeholders, regulators think all these recyclers are chores, are thieves, and companies don't want to do anything. So companies believe informal sector is thief and regulators are inactive. If you talk to informal sector, they say everyone is thief, including us. So then who takes a high moral ground? And then folks like us who are from outsiders trying to solve a system or trying to see a system, then we believe that some level of data falsification, data hiding, that lack of transparency, then inhibits trust. Why should I partner with someone who I believe is not fully transparent? So how to bringing that transparency? And this was also evident in the Intel case also. So when Intel started addressing this, they realized that they have to build trust. Building trust requires time. Talking with miners in Congo requires time, and that transparency. The data capturing, data monitoring, and then documentation will aid transparency. And finally, you have to gain legitimacy for your work. So whatever you do, simply you beating your own chest and saying, oh, well, I am the best and I am the best because I say I am the best, doesn't make it worthwhile. So for HP to do, or for Apple to say that we use this much recycled material in this, what's the proof? Have there been any third-party assurance mechanism that has been carried out? Or if you believe I collect and recycle 100% of my part, what does recycling mean? Does recycling simply mean collection and going it somewhere? What is the proof? And that assurance we are seeing of in ESG field. So when we broadly connect it to the environment, social governance theme, that is a larger theme that is getting more traction these days. We see a lot of demand for now companies to go for third-party assurance mechanisms. And I think it's only a matter of time before in EPR also in India, we might have these third-party audited EPR reports. Right now, it's essentially left to the companies. Regulators might not have the bandwidth to go up and check the veracity of information contained there. So those third-party audits, I think, are required. And then if you have to, again, talking purely from the point of view of literature, the supply chain sustainability, there is a very classic paper in one of Journal of Management, which talks about the supply chain that is visible. So just talking from the point of view of producers like Intel, when they had to look upstream to the miners. But the same approach you can consider for a downstream approach, going till recycling. So they had identified 6 factors, which influences how which organizations are able to do it well than the others. So it depends on factors like how complex the organization is for multinational corporations, and the structures, the holdings, the JVs. So that is one factor. How complex the supply chain is, how varied the supply chain is, how much power do you as a company have over your suppliers and expect them to maintain and meet some certain standards, how visible you are, how visible the supply chain is to you. Do you know the first order suppliers, the second orders, and the beyond? How concerned are you about reputation? Is goodwill one of your biggest strength? And would you want to then do something to preserve those goodwill? And then companies that are participating more in voluntary CSR. Now, this research was not done in Indian context because in India now most CSR is mandatory CSR. But if you are participating out of your own will in CSR, that used to positively influence the visibility of your supply chain. So I think these are some things that I would perhaps say the role of cross-sector partnerships for companies managing e-waste or plastic waste. So I'll end it here.
Thank you, Professor Kalyan. I think, again, some terrific points about trust building, transparency. I think a lot of these things may be lacking in a lot of measures that are being planned, because of which the end result is not always what was expected. Very great food for thought there as well. Esha, back to you. How do you identify and prioritize projects? I would assume I've seen your website and there is a range of stakeholders, geographies. There are places where you're working by virtue of being eco-sensitive. So how do you go about planning, prioritizing the projects which you wish to fund as a EPW?
So basically, the alliance now, as we have matured as an organization, we have a strategic project portfolio management process. What we look at a bunch of different things, right? So we look at our impact metrics. So the impact metrics we track are reduced unmanaged waste. We track capturing of value, we look at mobilization of capital. So we very strongly believe that the role of the alliance is to catalyze investments, but the problem is too large for the alliance, even with the funding that the alliance brings to the table, to solve on its own. So the catalyzed capital is another impact metric that we track. And then we look at the social benefit created, we look at the jobs created, and so on and so forth. So every project that comes our way, one of the things we will look at is how does this project perform, or what are the parameters vis-a-vis the impact metrics, and how do they contribute there. Then we also look at the solution hierarchy. So we believe that there is no one solution fits all, and waste is very, very contextual, right? So even within a particular location, if you look at the entire year, your waste streams that come in during the festival season will be very different to the waste stream that comes in the non-festival season, to the monsoon, to the summer. So waste is a very variable and very contextual issue. So we look at where projects lie on the waste hierarchy. So when we are looking at regions like Indonesia, for instance, we will look at projects where we first create the infrastructure for collection and sorting and so on. If we start talking about really advanced chemical recycling right away at the word get-go, it's not conducive, right? Because first you have to set the first set of building blocks in place before you can get the feedstock to feed a chemical recycling plant. When we're looking at more mature geographies where the collection systems exist, there is segregated collection already mandated by law, those places we can look at projects which are more advanced sorting, advanced recycling kind of technologies to begin with. So we look at where these projects fall in the solution hierarchy and what is sort of contextually fit. We also look at the geographical coverage. So basis, where the need is, where our stakeholders are, that's the other part. And last but not the least, very, very importantly, the economic viability for scaling and replication. So while our job is to come in and de-risk, as I said, we put a lot of emphasis on working with partners from the get-go to deep dive into the economic model that they are proposing. How does your PL look 5 years down the line? Is the PL red throughout, or how are you going to sustain? Where is your OPEX going to come from? If you are a for-profit, what it is that's going to drive you to run this business or operate this facility 5 years down the line. So the whole economic modeling piece is something that we look at, and we look at it primarily from the point of view of scaling and replication, because we will not be able to do 1,000 projects. So if we do one project, we want to see how can this business model or this solution model be replicated by others who can pick this up as a learning and then do maybe 50 more of these. And for that, looking at the whole economic modeling and the business model part of it is very important. And last but not the least, we also look at what the external environment is, right? So what is the policy landscape in which the project is being proposed? Does it make sense with the existing or the upcoming policies? What is the social context, and so on and so forth. We do projects with not-for-profits, we do projects with for-profit agencies, and we deploy a whole range of financing mechanisms. So we do grants, we do patient capital debt, and most recently we have partnered with Lombard Odier to set up a PE fund where the Alliance is a keystone investor, and we will then look at also the PE investment landscape via that particular plastic circularity fund. So this is how we go about deciding which project to fund. We have an investment committee, which finally, gives recommendations on whether or not we go ahead with a particular project. We have a very strong due diligence process for partners that we work with. All of this basically is to try and minimize. We know we cannot cut the risk to zero. Essentially, what we do is risky. We are working in high-risk geographies in a very complicated, topic, landscape, all of that. But we try and see how much of the mitigation mechanisms or the hedging on the risk that we can do right at the start, which basically increases the chances of success as we deploy or implement a project with the partners.
Yes, thank you, Esha. I think reproducibility and replicability are two critical aspects of the risk projects. If you could beat that, and then there's nothing to hold it back. Also, we were very happy to have associated with the EPW in Goa. A lot of our low-value recyclables like HM and MLP and all were being segregated. And just yesterday, we disposed a load for recycling. So that was a great experience from our side as well. Do we have Mr. Chandra Mohan with us? Sreepriya?
Yes, he has joined, but he said he'd need 5 minutes to switch on the camera. Okay. So we can probably proceed with the other panelists. Yeah.
Okay. So fine, I'll come back to Manjari. Obviously, EPR is directly linked to circularity and everything. So as a producer, tell us about what y'all are, what HP is doing in terms of its EPR compliances. What are the challenges? You've shared a couple of innovative ideas, but there are any more which help meet your EPR compliance? Happy to know those.
Thank you, Sushant, again for the question. So HP, like other brands, also have been one of those brands who have been diligently working in India and globally, and especially in India also, on EPR, be it e-waste or plastic waste. For that matter, we are one of those companies who started rolling out EPR in India before even the rules were passed. On top of it, we also have developed some IPR, which is individual producer responsibility, where we offer the customer, because Hewlett Packard Enterprise deals in products like servers and storage, which are not, you can't expect a customer to carry it to a collection center and dump the product. You can't be expecting a server which is like a almara bureau size or a cupboard size kind of a thing to carry on the back, right? So we offer a free of cost on door step pickup facility for all our customers, irrespective of the brand, whether it's HPE or our competitors. Kalyan spoke about partnership. We partner with non-competitive or competitive spaces of it also, where we offer doorstep pickup for products under our category. We have partnered with a lot of other organizations also for doing our EPR. For example, Karo is one of our partners who we have partnered for e-waste obligation, meeting our e-waste obligation. Similarly, on plastic waste, we have partnered with organizations like Sahas, who are not for profit or organizations, or for profit also. They have an entity who are helping us to meet our plastic waste obligations. We are also immensely investing on creating awareness, because that's one area where I see as a challenge also, that why the targets are so high and we are not able to meet the targets, or I feel that's a challenge in the EPR domain, is because of the lack of awareness in the consumers in India right now. Unlike Europe, where the consumers are well aware that what they need to do with once the product reaches the end of the life, Indian consumer mindset has to be changed. So we are immensely investing on creating awareness in that area. On top of it, we also offer a variety of product return, trading, and recycling program across our global market. We have a state-of-the-art technology renewal centers, which are located not in India but outside India. And in 2020, so what does the Technology Renewal Center does is it extends the life of the consumer products, whether it's HP products or not. We take it back and try to refurbish and extend the life of the product and remarket it. So you extend the life, again, adding to the circular economy story. Yes. In 2020 alone, our technology renewal centers processed 3.1 million assets, 90% of which was remarketed and given a new life, whereas the balance 10% was recycled in an environmentally sound manner. Now, if I come to the challenges, because that's the second question that you posted to me, was what are the challenges do I see in this? One is obviously the consumer mindset in terms of using this renewed technology. We still do not buy renewed or upcycled technology. Whereas we all know how economically viable they are, how environmentally sustainable they are. And considering the recent, we all would have heard and read, right? I know not many of the audience here are from the ICT sector, but a lot of you would have heard at least and read in the newspaper the supply chain constraints that we went through. We were struggling to get the materials. We are struggling to get the components. At the same time, if this was, if we had good take for this upcycled and a renewed product, the situation would have been something different. That being said, I see another big challenge is the concept of the lack of the concept of shared responsibility. Pascal spoke about it, all actor principle. Right now, whether in Europe or in India because has followed the European model and we had adopted the extended producer responsibility concept, where the onus and accountability of anything and everything lies only on the producer. Anything goes wrong, hold the producers accountable. Catch hold of him, he will be penalized, he will be suspended to do business and everything like that. Whereas there is a need to shift the mindset, not only the consumer, but I think the regulator's mindset also. What we need, and I endorse what Pascal said. When Pascal, you were talking about it, I was feeling like this is something that we have been talking, not just Hewlett Packard Enterprise, but the industry has been talking about it for a long time. But whenever we went and spoke, we were being zoned out, saying that you are trying to shy away from the responsibility of taking the ownership, whereas it is not. If you want to have an effective take back system, recycling system, what is at most of importance right now is every stakeholder has a legal accountability on it. And it has to happen. Unless and until we have that, we have amended the rules, we have formulated a new rules, 2022 rules has been come up, but again, the concept of shared responsibility is not there. And we are keeping on increasing the targets, putting more and more pressures on the producers to meet. One of my industry colleague friends, he always gives this example to me, and I like to quote here, though it's not my own example, that an average student, let's say, you put a pressure on an average student that you have to score 90 or 95 plus. And unless until you do that, I'll not allow you to enter the house. Can he overnight get 95%? No, he can't. He will try to cheat. And that's what will happen. So I think what we need is to have this shared responsibility concept included. And obviously, as I spoke earlier, the mindset change for newer and renewed technology thing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Manjari. Yes, the mindset change, and I also like you rightly said at the start, people's mindset that this product has value and I shouldn't be paying for it, but I should get it back. I think that would be a serious hindrance also in meeting your EPR compliances, but hopefully with time this will change. Sreepriya, can I go to one last question to Professor Kalyan?
Yes, please, you can. Yeah.
Yes. Professor Kalyan, Pascal mentioned that one change that he would like to see, one modification rather he would like to see was a move from looking at quantums by themselves, rather look at things like CRMs. Manjari just mentioned about the lack of materials and components that they recently faced also. So how do you see the entire CRM related policy, if at all, evolving? What is it that we can expect? How can these supply chain related issues and costs and all be improved through policy and other means?
Thank you for that question, Sushant. I think to the best of my knowledge, there is no existing policy in India on CRM, critical raw materials. But the conversation I was having with one of my friends at CEW, what I am told is we can expect a policy on CRM in India very soon, within the next year or so. So within a year, so we can expect a policy on critical raw materials. And there has been increased trust by the government. So multiple ministries are right now carrying out projects, studies on defining CRM, for example, dimensions of what should be the dimensions. If you look into the global dimensions, EU, Australia, and I think US, the dimensions are supply chain risk and the economic value. How economically value that material is for your economy, and what are the supply chain risk. Now, those supply chain risk conversations accelerated rather after the post-COVID disruptions, because most countries felt the disruptions in their manufacturing, especially in high-tech sector, wherever semiconductors were required. That has accelerated this push towards that. Now, the conversation we need to have in India, and which we are having with some partners, are now recyclability or recycling. Can it or should it be one of the dimensions, should it be sub-dimension, if not a dimension of critical materials? The conversation you're talking about CRM, I think one of the project I am currently involved in, that is looking at urban mining, where they are looking at these minerals, that's secondary raw materials, minerals that I can recover from a waste laptop or a waste mobile phone. If I can reprocess it, recover it, and reuse it in the Indian context, because for most of this electronics sector right now, government wants to get electronic manufacturers come to India and set up shop in India. But most of these materials, especially the critical materials, India does not have enough reserves for that. So you have to get it from outside. And these critical materials, as it so happens, is China controls more than 3/4 of critical materials, either directly or indirectly. So whether it is China, whether it is any other company, the point is not China, but the point is any one country having direct or indirect control of more than 3/4 of these minerals. And these minerals are required for your solar panels, for your wind turbines, for your electric vehicle batteries, for your electronic chips, for nuclear energy, for defense, for automobile. So for minerals that are required for that high dependency on one particular country, and if something wrong goes with the country, as we saw recently, then all your industry then goes for a toss. And that has, I think, which I have seen in last 6 months, 6 months back, or maybe 1 year back, if we were having this webinar 1 year back when you would have started this series, there wouldn't have been as much discussion on CRM in the Indian context. But now that when I go and see, people are seeing that by maybe this year, and India is hosting the G20 presidency this year. Yeah. So maybe we can expect a policy also on CRM, and India is also trying parallelly to be part of a global alliance. Some countries, I think, have started an alliance 6 months back, which is on critical and strategic minerals. Now, what is critical and what is strategic there's also a very thin line. With strategic minerals, the national security comes into play. The national policies comes into play. In critical, you leave that aside. It's more the economic value, perhaps. But there's a larger conversation happening on this. And very recently, many of us might be aware that initial reports suggest a large lithium reserves have been found in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, lithium is one of the critical minerals, but there are more needs to be done. But I think we'll see more conversation on urban mining, secondary raw materials, the whole this discussion of automobile scrap, ELV rules. One of the factors was that we need to have recover these materials, use it in India, and reduce our dependency on imports from outside.
Yes. Great. Thank you for those inputs, Professor Kalyan. I think let's still, I think Mr. Chandra Mohan is still not here, but would the panelists like to pose any questions to each other? Could use that time to do so.
I think one question. So when Manjari mentioned about this collective responsibility, so I understand where that is coming from, and but just to be devil's advocate, so is collective responsibility also an excuse for not to do much? Okay, you do everything, you do something, you do others. So it's like when all are responsible, no one is accountable. So,
Kalyan, aren't you contradicting your own statement where when you made a presentation that a trust needs to be there, and now you're coming up and saying that because hold on, because this is not the, and as I said, when we started this concept of shared responsibility, when we pitched it, the way it was perceived was the producers are trying to shy away from the responsibility. And you heard me, not just me, forget about the producer. I'm representing a producer society today. Forget about it, me. Pascal shared his in his talking points. He did mention, for that matter, you also shared when I believe you were talking about it, that all players should be collaborated and partnered. What is happening today is at least in the 2016 rules, what happened was, I'll take a very small example, PRO. The PROs were part of the 2016 rule. However, they were registered as a separate entity under the rules. Anything goes wrong, however, the PRO was not held responsible. The suspension would happen for a producer. The EPR authorization would be suspended for a producer because, and what happens when the suspension happens is the producer cannot do business. He can't ship any product into the country or cannot manufacture or sell any product in the country. The producer responsibility organization, which was a separate legal entity registered by the CPCB, would walk away free. And that's what I meant by the shared responsibility is there's an accountability on every stakeholders. If you do mistakes, you are liable for that. For anything that goes wrong, for example, if something goes wrong in my kitchen, I should be held responsible. I can't be holding you accountable for it, right? And that's exactly what I was trying to say. I see Mr. Chandra Mohan Thakur ji there. I'll take a pause here.
Welcome, Mr. Chandra Mohan Thakur ji. To just a brief introduction, not an introduction, but he's member secretary of Madhya Pradesh Pollution Control Board. Sir, welcome. We don't have much time left, unfortunately, but we'll still love to hear from you. Tell us in terms of circular economy and EPR being the nodal agency, the regulatory agency, what are the challenges that you face, and if there are any solutions that you may have implemented or that you're aware of? Also, sir, I would say, tell us about the Indore model. I'm from Panji in Goa, and in all deliberations, we do 16-way segregation and a lot of things are happening, but still, people, the benchmark, the thing that you want to emulate is the Indore model. So post that, if you could touch up a little bit on that, what is it that is happening that is, that is the talk of town? We'd be happy to hear from you, sir. Over to you. Sir, you're not audible. Still not audible. There are some questions. Let me see. Oh, Pascal has already answered one question. Great.
There is Ms. Shweta Singh is asking how
Yes.
do we, by we, I think their organization or as an individual change, inspire or rather have a shift in the mindset of enterprises who are reluctant towards change. Now that's a question I think all of our speakers can probably share some insights on their viewpoints on this.
I think Manjari may want to comment on that.
Am I audible now?
Yes. Yes, sir,
Yes,
you are.
yes.
Clear.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
First of all, I wanted to apologize for joining in late. Something had come up in the last minute, so I couldn't join in time. As the nodal agency, pollution control boards are supposed to work to impose the idea of circular economy. First of all, see, the linear economy concept is very well understood by the industry and everybody. The biggest challenge that we face in circular economy is that the concept of circular economy has this concept of extended producer responsibility built in it. It cannot be imagined without EPR. So when we talk about circular economy, the producer has to understand that the product that the producer is producing, the raw material has been sourced from the nature. So once the product is, for example, if I talk about plastic, so all the raw materials come from petroleum, which is eventually a natural resource, which is there because millions and millions years ago, a lot of plants and animals, were buried and they converted into petroleum, and from that we derive polymers and then plastic. From that plastic we make bottles. But the producers have this understanding that the job of recycling is the responsibility of, say, the waste recycler. So majorly that the challenge that we face is the producer does not really understand the concept of producer responsibility. To give just another example, right now we were, especially in Madhya Pradesh, we are struggling with the fly ash management in the area of Singrauli region, which is a lot of thermal power plants and many coal mines. And it is like last 15 years ago, it was seen as the boon that because we were opening ultra mega power plants with very high generation capacities. Today now Singrauli is facing this problem of huge fly ash, which is not being managed. Now, when we talk to thermal power plants, they take responsibility because they are the ones who produce fly ash through their power generation. But when we talk to the coal mines, their response generally is that they don't produce fly ash. They say that we produce coal. Now, whatever happens to coal happens in thermal power plants, so it is their responsibility. So we have a tough time as the Ministry of Environment to convince coal that it is their responsibility also, and they need to shell out money from their pocket to manage that fly ash also. That's the biggest challenge that we're facing, that the producer as such is not totally coming into the EPR thing. Same thing we are facing in vehicles also, in tires also, and in e-waste also. So for example, in e-waste, the practical problem that a lot of e-waste recyclers tell us is that though they are registered, they have all the setup, but even now the system of electronic waste being disposed of in a particular manner. So people just give away their old mobile phone, they just throw it in their dustbins, and it doesn't reaches the e-waste recycler. So in fact, in many states, in Madhya Pradesh also, and I think in Gujarat also, now they are giving incentives, positive incentives, that if you give your old computers or laptops, iPads, then they are giving you some money in return. Otherwise, their business is not getting viable. So when we're talking about circular economy, first thing is the challenge of EPR. The producer has to understand that their role is very, very crucial, and that linkage till the last point, till the recycler point, has to be fixed. Secondly, most of the industry people are thinking of circular economy only in terms of dumping of the waste. Dumping of waste doesn't really mean circular economy. See, for example, there is e-waste. If you just dump it anywhere, then actually it's not circular. It's still linear because you've just dumped it. Or say in case of fly ash, unless you bring it back into the system. So, for example, plastic industry has been able to do it to some extent, that you recycle it, make plastic pellets, and then bring it back into recycled plastic. So that is when it's truly circular. So the circularity has to be ingrained, and in which case I think Indore is a very, very good example, because what it has done with its municipal solid waste is it's not only about its dump sites, and they have created a bio-CNG plant which runs from the municipal solid waste. So how is municipal solid waste in the first place comes out? It comes out because of uses of energy in various forms. So, we consume energy in various forms, and then we create that waste. Through that waste, because that waste is then segregated into organic and inorganic through dry and wet waste segregation, door-to-door collection, etc. And then it is converted to manure where it's possible. And a bio-CNG plant then again converts it into energy, which is again reused. So basically, we are not, creating any more extra pressure on the fossil fuel from which the energy was derived in the first place, and we are able to recreate energy through the solid waste that was produced through this process. So this is truly circular. Similar experiment has started in Bhopal also. There is a Kabadiwala system that has come up, and they are also trying to produce energy. Recently, Gwalior has also started a bio-CNG plant. So this truly means circular economy. One thing that is the biggest enabler in this, which I think now Government of India has also formalized it in the form of Mission Life, lifestyle for environment. What Indore has taught us, and it has been for the last 6 years that Indore has managed to stay the top city in the country in terms of cleanliness, that in Indore the people participation is optimum. For example, I'll just give there's a big festival that is celebrated near Holi, in which the entire city comes on the roads and plays colors. And when this festival was being celebrated now, the moment this festival ends in the evening, the entire road is cleaned within hours. So that is because the public has the awareness. Our state chief minister often quotes an example that some outsider traveler came to Indore and he was traveling in a taxi and was about to throw a used wrapper on the road, and then the taxi driver said that there's a dustbin in my taxi, please don't throw it on the road. Now that kind of ownership which has come in the community, because in Madhya Pradesh also we are struggling that why Bhopal, even though it is the cleanest capital, why is it not #1 city in the country? We are mostly in top 5, top 2, we have been second also, 5th also, but we have never been #1. So a lot of other cities are learning from Indore. In fact, MP has asked all of its cities to have exposure visits to Indore. Other municipal bodies are also learning the good practices of Indore. Ujjain is also trying to do that. And a lot of smaller towns have also started featuring in the top 100 of the country now. So MP that way has got this name in cleanliness. The biggest difference that I have found across all cities is that in Indore, major focus is on people participation. So the segregation of waste that happens, hardly 10% of the waste is segregated at the segregation facility. 90% is segregated at home itself, which in Bhopal, the municipal corporation is still struggling to get segregation at source. So that comes when the participation is of the people. So now government has also formally announced a program called Mission Life, which Honorable Prime Minister has announced. And in that, the focus is mostly on engaging in lifestyle which is sustainable for environment. So for example, segregation of waste sounds very easy, but it takes an effort in the kitchen or in the industry. In fact, large industries are easy to comply. It is mostly in small households that it takes an extra effort. You have to have 2 different dustbins and you have to segregate. So, and it requires a lot of positive incentive, positive motivation so that people regularly participate. So Indore has been able to do it year on and year on. And whenever an outsider goes to Indore, you can feel that the ownership is from the community. The same thing we have realized that it has to be in whichever area of circular economy we are talking about. For example, the biggest community participation that right now we are focusing on is most of the waste recyclers or the waste managers, I would say, are the traditional old kabadi walas, or which are mostly on the fringe side of the city, which are who are not very organized, highly informal sector, highly unorganized sector. The moment you include too much of regulations and laws, then new formal sector industry tries to come in that picture. And then the resistance is from this informal sector. For example, what we are experiencing in, say, in the tire industry. So, and now the end-of-life vehicle concept is also coming in. The traditional waste managers of tires are mostly informal, unorganized sector, and their way of disposing of tires is highly polluting. They just burn it off. The oil that comes in, the wire that comes out, these are all very polluting. A very well-controlled mechanism of pyrolysis has been established, but the people engaged in pyrolysis are in conflict with the traditional managers of tire waste. So we have to get these old players and the new players in coherence with each other. So the new waste management players cannot, remove the existing players and then come to the market. So what we are doing right now is that we are, as Pollution Control Board, we are helping the existing players come on board to pollution norms. So, for example, in Madhya Pradesh, we started a Vivad Se Vishwas scheme. So all those small waste management players who are not following pollution norms, we gave them a one-time offer that we will, give away all the previous fines and levies, etc., and we'll start afresh. You take a consent from Pollution Control Board right from today, and we'll ignore anything wrong that has been done previous to this date. So you come on board, you make systemic changes, and so that you also start disposing of waste in a clean manner, so that those old players also keep coexisting. This is what has been done successfully in municipal solid waste also. So the old rack pickers, they have not been, removed when MRF facilities or segregation sheds were being made. The old rack pickers were in fact formalized through Nagar Nigam. They were given names like Swachhagrahi or Swachh Swayam Sevak, etc. And so they were brought into that system. I think that community participation thing and taking all the stakeholders along is what will make these EPR successful. Right now, the major challenge, these are major challenges that as PCB we are facing is one, trying to convince the originating industry that it is their responsibility also to manage the waste that eventually emanates. And in fact, they will have to start putting in systems where they use the products of the waste recyclers as raw materials. Only then the circularity gets completed. And second challenge is trying to keep the old players, the unorganized informal players of waste management still in the loop and trying to bring them onto this new norms so that they are also involved in this. And third is, trying to get maximum community participation, trying to get that feeling from the people that this is a collective responsibility and everybody has to be part of it.
Thank you, sir. I think very valid points, and it's such a tough task from our own experiences to have the entire community participate so proactively in initiatives like this. Also, it's easier said than done. Everyone talks about integration of informal sector, but it is not a cakewalk. So really, hats off to you for the initiatives that you all have taken. Also, as you were talking, sir, I wish you were there during the discussion. A lot of the points that you raised were actually discussed in detail through our speakers. But anyway, we'll perhaps share the minutes with you at least, maybe a few of your points in terms of the shared responsibility and things of that sort were already taken up, even improved partnerships and the like. Anyway, thank you very much, sir. It was nice that you were able to make the time, and good having you. So any other questions again within panel or even any other audience questions that we can take? We have about already running late, but yeah.
Sushant,
yes,
I think we can proceed to the closing remarks in the interest of time, because I think our guests would have another meetings. So yeah, maybe we can start with Manjari.
Thank you, Sreepriya, and thank you, Sushant. Thank you, Chandra Mohanji, for the great insight and your experience sharing on MP especially. And before I close, I like to thank Karo Sambhav for organizing not just this event, but all the 8 webinars that has been organized. It has been quite insightful, I think, not only for me, but I'm sure whoever would have participated in all those 8 webinars, they would have seen some values and some information or some knowledge they would have gained out of it. That being said, from a producer's perspective, I'm repeating what I said already, because I have already spoken in my previous when I was given an opportunity to talk. Is I think there is a need to look beyond recycling now. When we talk about circular economy, we need to have a holistic approach. Think of new avenues of which can bring impact to the businesses and to the environment rather. We need to look at that. Also, I would like to re-emphasize, if we want to have an effective EPR, whether it's plastic waste, e-waste, battery waste, EV, anything and everything we talk about, every stakeholder should consider a very important role in the entire ecosystem, and they should play their role. There can't be any free riders, first. And second, most important, no shying away from the responsibility. Everyone should feel the accountability on their shoulders and they should deliver. Only then we can have an effective EPR mechanism. With that, I'll close here. And I'm very sorry, I'm already running quite late to my another meeting. I'll take a leave from here now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Professor Kalyan, your closing remarks.
Yeah, first of all, thank you again, Sushant, Sreepriya, and Karo for inviting me and having this lovely 1.5 hour discussion on this topic. One thing I realized as I was preparing for this webinar that you have hosted all these videos on your YouTube channel, which I think is a very good thing, so that even those who are unable to join today or may would want to revisit these topics later can do so. For the courses, for example, that I teach, I often recommend some video links to my students, and they're supposed to watch those videos, and then come back with the reflections. So I think the number of episodes, this is the 8th, I think. So I'll perhaps share those links with them. So hats off to you for them. I think, yeah, for CSP, so we've discussed that any circular economy initiative on any waste stream wouldn't be as effective or wouldn't be complete if we don't have cross-sector partnerships, because the country that we're living in, especially India, and the role of informal sector pervasive now. Informal sector may not be as much pervasive in perhaps other sectors, maybe in others, but they have their presence across sectors. And for any EPR regime to be effective, those cross-sector partnerships are essential. And the factors we have discussed, so I'll not perhaps go on that. One thing which I did not touch upon much, maybe beyond the scope for the topic, which Manjari talked about, the role of designing. Now, the design for environment. All these e-waste regulations will fail if you don't make the changes at the design stage, because essentially we are looking only at the downstream side, unless we make changes in the design stage. And most of the design, if it does not happen in India, if India is not party to those design conversations, then essentially we are looking at creating volumes of waste and just trying to grapple our ways around how do we solve that. But that design conversation needs to happen. I think on a lighter note to Chandra Mohanji, so I am from Bhopal, so I would want to see Bhopal trumping Indore in the clean city ranking, and I'm waiting for perhaps that day. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kalyan. Esha, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. In the interest of time, Chandra Mohan Thakurji, just like to say that, you know, the way I see Indore, it's a classic case of a PPP model being successful. And the role of the municipality or the Nagar Nigam in this case is exemplary, because had the municipality not and the regulators not come into the picture to first start driving the source segregation piece with working with not-for-profits, not having set up those transfer stations. I have been to those facilities myself a couple of times, and not having set up those transfer facilities, the NEPRA facility will not get the waste in the segregated manner. And I think it is a testament to how well the front end works, that you can stand on the tipping floor of an MRF and not have to hold your nose. And that to me is a proper MRF, the way a material recovery facility should function, and the kind of ways that it should get in. And that bears testament to the success of the entire PPP model, which I think we should try and see how we can have more indoors across the country where these PPP models work as successfully. So kudos to the public sector actors for making it happen in Indore.
Yes, thank you, Esha. And I think last but not the least, Pascal, your closing remarks, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Sushant. I must say that I found this incredibly informative, the whole episode, the whole session today. Really, really very informative and insightful. I mean, for example, what Kalyan mentioned, he said he was talking about the wicked problems, the trust deficit, the legitimacy. It's exactly what we're talking about. And so creating this circularity, the circular economy and partnership across the sector is incredibly important, but it takes time also. That's one of the messages, actually. When we started with EPR in Europe 20 years ago, it takes time to set up a system, to gain trust, to raise awareness with consumers, and so forth. And so that's absolutely commendable. Manjari did talk about design for recycling, Kalyan. She did talk about design for recyclability and longevity and so forth. But I totally agree with those that say that EPR has not been successful in, let's say, fostering more eco-design of products. I think that's really a conclusion that we can all agree on. And it's a bit unfortunate, but it's there's still a long way to go to make. And I think we are now on the right track. When I hear discussion and when I hear for example, Manshi talked about this product as a service. I think it's the Green Lake, HP Green Lake. I think it's very. I looked it up on the internet. It's very interesting. And so this type of initiatives is exactly what we need to do. So this product as a service. And so we are on the right way finally, but still there's a long way to go. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Pascal, again for all the support as well throughout the series of 8 webinars that we've had. Sreepriya, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And Pascal, I think you removed that particular statement from your presentation, but I'd like to reiterate. So it says that the all actors principle means that all entities that have access to e-waste are subject to minimum legal obligation and collaborate towards responsible operations. I think it's a very powerful statement. And on that note, I would like to thank all of our panelists, all of our speakers. Thank you so much for taking out time and contributing to this fantastic final episode. Yes, Mr. Kalyan, please.
No comments. I was trying to just sort of,
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I would also like to thank my playback champions from Karo, Sambhav, Tarun and Amrita, who have been ensuring that all the episodes are being telecasted properly and everything is going fine. So thank you so much to them. And thank you to all our listeners for joining in from day 1, episode 1 to episode 8. And we will soon be communicating on a summary about the season 1. We will be sharing a note with all of you all our speakers as well as our audience. And we'll also communicate what is next, what is coming up. There is a season 2 coming up in a few months, and we will soon let you know. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you.